Hi, my name is Casey Kellogg, and this is my course final for Eastern Washington University 564 School Law Summer Quarter of 2020. Our focus will be on students' rights, particularly the First Amendment during COVID-19. Many of you have probably seen this photograph as it has gone viral recently out of a high school about an hour north of Atlanta, Georgia. The high school being North Paulding High School in Dallas, Georgia. This photo went viral across the country and has whipped up lots of fever because of the times that we're living in under COVID-19. And whereas the students within this hallway are failing to be able to recognize two CDC guidelines, one of which is social distancing of 6 feet, and the second of which is the lack of masks or face coverings among these students because of the issue of personal choice versus collective responsibility. This has whipped up a lot of fever on both sides of the aisle, but also when it came to students' rights. Does the individual in this case have the right to be able to post a photo like this on a public setting and to displace it then across media? So our guiding question for this assignment will be, can a public school punish a student for sharing a photo of classmates not wearing masks and not social distancing on campus? Or even simply put, can a public school punish a student for sharing a photo of students on a high school public campus? Again, a First Amendment challenge during the COVID-19 times. For our agenda for today, we've already kind of covered our little hook as well, the photo and guiding question. And upcoming here, we have a brief history of students' rights, the North Paulding High School case, and more in particular, the case verdict, as well as legal implications and reflections moving forward. Kind of a brief history of students' rights is is looking back on case law. What is settled law? What is the law on what students can or cannot do when it pertains to the First Amendment? The overall hierarchy case that probably presides all is the Tinker versus Des Moines case. This was a case of two high school students who showed or wore black armbands to a school or a public school to protest the Vietnam War. The school had a code policy that they created to outlaw such speech, and hence there was a collision course here on whether it was legal or not for these students to have grounds to wear these armbands on a public high school campus. This case ended up going to the Supreme Court, and I apologize. I need to pull my notes up here to actually be able to speak to this. The federal court or federal district court that this was first registered in ruled in favor of the school over the students, saying that the school had the grounds to be able to block the students from their freedom of speech because of the disruption that it might bring to the public sphere. This case then found its way through the appeals process and up to, again, the ultimate level of the Supreme Court of the United States, who ultimately decided the opposite. They decided in favor of the students, saying, quote, undifferentiated fear or apprehension of disturbance is not enough to overcome the right of freedom of speech. Because there was a fear, or again, the possibilities of what these armbands might represent is not enough to prove that they actually are justified to block or take away a student's freedom of expression or freedom of speech. From there, we move into more of some more specific cases that deal with not just the general student speech, kind of a Tinker Des Moines being again the mother of them all case or of case studies. But we move more towards Bethel School District and Fraser. This is one of two non-political speech kind of case laws that we can look at for ruling within our current case. The Bethel School District versus Fraser case was ultimately about a school acceptance speech in our own dear, at least my state of Washington. Within Bethel High School back in 1986, a student used a very explicit sexual metaphor in an acceptance speech of a school kind of a running for office that he had done in front of roughly about 600 students at an assembly. The school found this kind of sexually explicit material disseminated to all their students as disruption, and as rightfully they end up at that point suspending the student for 2 days. The federal U.S. Federal District Court ruled in favor of the student, though originally they said the student had the ability to have their freedom of speech, and the school actually was not justified in its suspension or retaliation. Although this has moved then forward up to the appeals process and ultimately then to the Supreme Court of the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States ultimately decided that students' rights are not as coextensive as those of adults. So ultimately, while an adult might have the freedom of speech to be able to use such explicit metaphor on a public grounds, a school or a student does not. And a student does not have the same rights as an adult when it comes to using speech. Another case we can look at as kind of case law for our own here is Killian versus Franklin Regional. This is where a student at a home computer had created a top 10 list that they ultimately were saying of 10 people at their school that, for whatever reason, very explicit things about them, such as, for example, a athletic director who they perceived as being overweight, and wrote some very offensive things about them, not only in a sexual manner, but also in a physical manner as well. This was ultimately disseminated and emailed out to a list of students. And within this case, the question was, again, off campus, can a school block or stop or suspend or in some way have punishment against a student for their speech off of campus? Here, the SCOTUS ultimately stated, quote, no actual disruption or reasonable fear of disruption ultimately can be good enough justification for taking a student's rights away. So this one we see that ultimately it's a backing of Tinker, but ultimately, because it was off of campus, was the biggest issue there. The school did not necessarily have the ability to punish the student because there was no actual disruption or reasonable fear of disruption from a statement that was made off of campus. So these are some of the case law that we look at in the presiding of our own case there. Now, within the North Paulding case, what we're looking at here with the kind of background of that photo was a student by the name of Hannah Waters. Hannah Waters is a 15-year-old sophomore student at North Paulding High School. And she took this photo in the hallway of her students as concern that she had when it came to students not abiding by CDC guidelines and the school not setting up enough parameters to help with those guidelines. This post photo ended up going viral. Was because it was posted online through Twitter, and then ultimately was picked up by local and national affiliates and spread across the globe. Hannah was originally received a 5-day suspension, and here's where her fight came into play, with her and her parents looking to take this case to a court to settle because they believed that she was ultimately being punished for something that she believed that she was only trying to raise awareness and point attention to faults or failures of the school. Now, some within the community had some very strong words on both sides of the aisle. Some that came as a kind of more of a positive light came here through a local news affiliate called 11 Alive. It's a local news here out of Atlanta. I'll press play here at 2:16.
At one metro area high school, and the student who took the picture has school to send me photos. So here's what some of you are saying about this online as we've been sharing this story. I'd be proud. This is what Christine says. I'd be a proud parent if my child was suspended for speaking out about this. And Alan says, if the school district cannot provide a better environment than this seems to be, they had no right opening up the schools. And Carrie says, I love this one right here. Like Representative John Lewis said, never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. And it's funny because that comment, and several people on my Facebook page made that exact comment. This is the type of good trouble to get into. But as you mentioned,
So as you can see, there were definitely some that came out in support of the student within the community. And nationally, she also gained a lot of support, but equally as much against her ability came out as well. I just want to make sure that we gave due air to both sides. Even the superintendent of the school district came out and stated that there is currently no mandate or force by local government to abide by any particular rules. Again, these are simply guidelines so that the school actually had not done anything illegal. Now, the verdict within this case, if we go back to, again, the actual code of conduct, Hannah actually once pointed out what the actual code of conduct was, admitted that she did break the law, though she believed that her 5-day suspension or punishment was overtly harsh. Her fear of being that this will be something that, as a 5-day punishment on her student record, may be something that could have implications on her future career as a student when it comes to colleges and moving on to higher education. In the end, though, the school district or the principal at the school, before this ended up going to an actual local court, or would have gone to, again, their local county court, was lifted. He decided to lift the 5-day suspension and to erase it from Hannah's record. What ultimately happened was this case was settled in what I call the court of public opinion, because it went and kind of raised such high, beliefs, emotions on both sides of the aisle, which is very comparable to very many other issues during this COVID-19 times. This was something that the school decided to back away from rather than face and to take and draw out legally. Now, the legal implications of this are, when it comes to case law, there are no specific case law to review when it comes to students posting on a school campus something that is not necessarily negative content, or, again, was meant to simply just raise awareness. With that, again, also there's still issues today when it comes to case law on and off campus. Where is that line in the sand drawn between legality? A lot of scholars that I read over this case also pointed out you have to ensure that the content that's shared, that there's equal punishment for those who post content that's positive versus content that's negative. And it cannot be more severely punishment against the kid who decides to post something that's negative in content versus somebody who posts something positive. So to make sure there's equity there. There's going to be enforcement concerns moving forward. There's no doubt, as, again, there's not a single abiding universal law on this policy for students when it comes to their freedom of speech when on school grounds. There's no doubt that there will be future legal challenges as the courts just continue to face these continuing new issues within our society that technology proposes. And with lasting repercussions or reflection, we need to remind ourselves that in 2020, that ultimately the law is still catching up with today's technology advancements. And students will always, in that part, be at this epicenter of that fault line between legality as well as illegal acts, and the implications on their lives will be large until this becomes settled case law. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Thank you again for the class.